Hi folks, welcome. This is Mr. Deep with another video. Today the question is, what does your God want you to know? Now, in the time that I've had this awakening process for the last couple of years, I meet people who are also on a spiritual path. And what I find interesting is that a number of these people don't really have any interest in many of the different areas that I have interest in, that I feel are very connected to the spiritual path. And basically my awakening involved a lot of research and continues to do so. And to name some of the topics I've written down: exopolitics, mind control, climate control technology, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, dark occult, light occult, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, psychology, psychiatry, genetic engineering, ancient history, mythology, quantum physics, virtual reality, scalar science, ethoscience, and I could go on. And I don't say these to boast. And furthermore, I'm not an expert really on any of these topics, if I'm honest. But I do ask the question, why does my path, my spiritual path, why am I so keen and interested on all of these other things that are really kind of foreign to other people who are, quote unquote, on a spiritual path? I guess the other question is, can one awaken without knowing all of these other different aspects that I think are directly related to spiritual development and spiritual awakening? I guess what I can do is answer for myself. The reason I want to know all of these topics is because I want to know the full nature of my enemy. And my enemy is the one, it's our enemy in that sense. It's the one that seeks to keep us asleep. And to give names, you could say the architect, the gatekeeper of the matrix, and understanding where it's come from, what it's doing, and kind of where it's going. What's the plan? What's the next step in terms of keeping us within this particular matrix trap? So I wish to know the influence, past, present, future. Now I'm going to say something which is quite bold and might offend, but I would say that if a spiritual path is not interested in these topics, I would question the spiritual path in itself, because I would even go as far as to say maybe it's not true awakening. And what I have discovered based on my own sort of religious experience and my research is that there's many spiritual paths that don't reveal the full nature of the enemy. In fact, many of them have as the god or the author the architect, but in clever disguise or renamed or rebadged, etc., etc. And essentially this enemy, to define the enemy, is to say that the enemy is a brilliant trickster. And as I said, he's god of so many of these elaborate, even advanced spiritual paths and systems. Now I need to mention, and this is the trick, this is really important to understand, is that these paths are not straight up Luciferian. They will always have a mixture of divine and anti-divine principles, and this is how we get trapped, because at a certain level of consciousness, the lower levels of consciousness, this mixing of divine and anti-divine, firstly at a lower level you don't notice the mixture, secondly you accept, which causes a split and actually traps the mind. And I would say that the biggest shortcoming in a lot of spiritual paths today is really understanding the enemy. And this leads to all manner of manipulation and deception in the spiritual seeker. And then once one is attached to certain ideas, principles, systems, gods, etc., they then, they have that cognitive dissonance. They don't want to let go of those ideas. So that trust and that loyalty, we have to be very careful in who we give it to or how we exercise that trust. And in regards to this enemy, this imposter, and I think, basic Christianity is a good example, because Christians tend to have an idea of the enemy. And what I've learned through the awakening process is that this trickster will reveal only what it needs to reveal of itself in order to continue your delusion. So what that essentially means is that a Christian will know the presence of the devil, will claim to fully understand the devil, but because of their undeveloped level of consciousness, they only know a finger. And the real task of true awakening and true freedom from this system is to know the enemy, to know the full program, the full trap, the full prison, which I would say, being a previous Christian, I had no idea, even though I would argue to the death that I did know the devil very well. So basically, on a true spiritual path, I would say one becomes the master of perceiving deception. So what I'd like to say in addition is I want to address the Christian researcher. I've learned some very valuable information, and I think that some of them are cutting edge in terms of what they're bringing to the public. And so I do want to give them credit where credit is deserved. However, the general solution is making Christ your Lord. And I think this Christ character is brilliant, because essentially there's so much divine aspects of this Christ personality found in the New Testament, yet there's certain aspects that are anti-divine, that are just, they don't fit into who the divine creator really is. I mean, look, if I want to keep it really simple, if you swallow the Old and New Testament, you've essentially got, this is the best example of divine and anti-divine mixed into one I could possibly give. But even in the New Testament, there is this twist, and that's what makes it so clever and so deceptive. And I think the other thing to consider is that I'm of the view that external worship, firstly, the true divine creator does not require worship. That's not how the divine creator works. And the problem with worship is that when you're externalizing your psychic energy, you're more than likely feeding false gods. Secondly, you're giving away the valuable psychic energy that you need to redirect to germinate the divine seed within, or to activate the DNA code that is sitting generally buried in mankind. And when this divine code is activated, it connects you to the God beyond this matrix, beyond this, as Wes Penray says, he says that our universe is only 4% of the real universe. And this is why it is a simulation or a modified universe. But the awakening connects you with a higher, more divine creator that is also surprisingly found within, but as said, generally buried. And basically, most spiritual paths, and certainly religions, they tend to manipulate this very genuine archetype in one way or another. And as the divine emerges within, you are more able to see what is divine and what is not divine in the world around you and in the spiritual world around you. But I would add that this is not just, it doesn't just land on your lap, that it's this combination of development, gaining access to the higher emotional and intellectual centers, and doing the work, reading, researching, and learning, which then connects back to all of those topics that I just mentioned earlier. So what I will say is this, and I'm in agreement with the Bible here: the kingdom of heaven is within. And generally what I find is the pseudopaths are followed by those with a subjective belief-based orientation. Also, what I find is that one's emotional center or heart is the gateway to the spiritual world and development. But if this is tainted, unpurified, blocked, carrying trauma, unhealed pain, then every endeavor that is spiritual will be twisted or distorted. And that pretty much makes up our soul-seeking spiritual world today. So you might be wondering, who on earth can be saved? And what I'll say is that freedom from the inner matrix leads to overcoming the outer matrix and help you to become a master of perceiving and sensing and overcoming deception. And part of this process, this inner process of awakening the divine, is making the unconscious conscious. It's revealing the shadows. And a big part of this is to begin to stop lying to yourself. And when you awaken this inner divine seed, as I said, you start to develop discernment. So more could be said on this, but what I want to end with is saying, as vast and elaborate are the modes of deception in our matrix reality, what is equally mind-blowing is that when one truly awakens, their ability to sniff bullshit a mile away, an inch away, is truly staggering. Furthermore, an awakening leads to one expanding their level of consciousness in ways that are quite hard to imagine. So this is the good news, and the conclusion is to wake up, and wake up means knowing your enemy. Okay, thank you.